everybody, and thank you for attending the 2020 online TMA Europe conference. My name is Alberto Cerini, and I'm currently a partner and head of restructuring and insolvency at Studio Temporary Manager, which is an interim management provider and turnaround boutique in Italy. I'm also a TMA board member in Italy. Today we will discuss together the turnaround market outlook across Europe. So, starting maybe with Stéphane from France. You have to activate your microphone. Thank you, Stéphane.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Alberto. Let's start with a quick overview of the situation in France. And to start with, let's have a look at the most important business support measure which has been implemented in France during and since the lockdown. And actually, there's been two really important measures. There's plenty of measures, but two which were really important. The first one was the state-guaranteed loan by which the French government granted up to the end of 2020 to the French company with less than 5,000 employees, a cash loan with a rate of 0.5%. The money is distributed by the banking networks, which are 90% guaranteed by the government in case of default of repayment of the beneficiaries. And the planned amortization plan will start in April 1st, 2021. As of 31st of July, nearly 150 billions were distributed to more than 500,000 companies in France. And the second major measure was the partial unemployment measure in order to avoid the explosion of unemployment. The state has supported since March 15 84%, which has been reduced to 72% by June 1st, of the net amount of wages of employees whose employment was suspended or reduced. This last measure, initially applicable until the end of 2020, could be maintained in 2021, subject to agreement with the union on the terms. In certain sectors of high workforce and directly impacted. 17 billion were spent over the first 3 months to support 8.8 million people in April, 7.8 in May, and 4.9 in June. So it was really a major plan. In terms of GDP, the 2020 outlook in France is a fall of around 11%. And just to compare, the impact on GDP of the subprime crisis in 2008 was only 2.9%. What is the situation today in France? As a result of the measure implemented during and since the lockdown, the cash situation of the company that benefited from this financing is pretty good today, pretty reassuring today. Those who has not benefited from them were legally protected from March 25th with special measure providing for the postponement to the end of August of the time limit for insolvency declaration. As a result, a significant influx of legal proceeding can be expected in the coming weeks and months. A few sectors particularly affected and large employer has benefited from specific support measure either through subsidies or through deferral of charges. And we're talking here about aeronautics, automobile, hotel, restaurants, shows, events, etc. But I guess it's been all the same all over Europe. In the meantime, from a market standpoint, the household saving rate has increased considerably since the beginning of the lockdown, up to 30% of incomes. This represents an amount of savings of around 100 billion euros. And as far as industrial investment are concerned, a 24% reduction in investment compared to the same period last year. Thereof, indefinitely of the support measure for businesses, the end of the crisis also presupposed a real recovery of consumption, and this is a major unknown in the short term because despite the partial unemployment measure, the number of unemployed people has increased in France of 800,000 additional people between March 15th and July 31st. Talking about employment, the government recovery plan officially announced on September 3rd foresee a recovery in employment during 2021 by 400,000 jobs taken over and 160,000 job creation. But assuming these targets are met, it would anyway lead us with a negative balance of 240,000 jobs relative to the pre-COVID situation by the end of 2021. let's have a quick overview of the Government Recovery Plan, which has been announced on September 3rd. The general philosophy of the plan is as much to support the economy in the short term, as well to prepare for the future and thereafter to promote sectors and technology of tomorrow. It's a 100 billion recovery plan over a period of 2 years, with 30 billion for energy transition, including 7 billion for home renovation, which will support the real estate market. And for example, 2 billion for the development of new hydrogen industry. 35 billion for business competitiveness and industrial relocation, including a 20 billion reduction in production taxes over 2 years, which aim to restore French industrial competitiveness and promote the relocation of primary industries, such as pharma, as an example. And 35 billion for employment and solidarity, including 6.5 billion for youth employment. For SMEs and mid-sized companies, 2 measures were particularly expected. The first being the allocation of 3 billion dedicated to strengthening SMEs and mid-sized equity. The 3 billion are intended to counterbalance the increase of indebtedness as a result of the state guaranteed loans, as I say, 115 billion euros. And the second measure is a 36 months averaging of the payment of unpaid payroll taxes during the lockdown period. So finally, what are the outlooks today? The measure implemented in the spring, which settled the cash issue, significantly increased the level of indebtedness of the recipient company. And given the relatively low level of equities of these companies, which is historically in France, and the possible operating loss on their closing this year, it is feared that their debt to equity ratio will deteriorate significantly next year. Clearly, the treatment of debts will be the subject to be addressed early next year, because with an internal and European market which are struggling to restart, many companies will have difficulty to simultaneously coping with current charge, paying their debts, and continue to invest. As it stands today, the state guaranteed loans that were granted would become refundable as 1st of April 2021 over a maximum period of 6 years. In this global context, the M&A market in the SMEs and mid-sized segment slowed down in the third quarter by 30% and should remain pretty low until the end of this year, pending a clear assessment of the impacts of the recovery plan on one hand and the impact of the new trend, such as teleworking and accelerated digital transition on the other hand. The government business support measure has temporarily halted operation in the distressed segment, which is expected to rebound significantly during the first half of 2021. And finally, in the large corporate segment, we have seen since the end of the confinement a very high level of M&A activity, the trend being to see large corporations stepping out of their non-core business, such as Lagardère and NG in France, and simultaneously to seek to consolidate themselves in their mainstream business, with offers sometimes not very friendly, such as Veolia on Suez for 10 billion euros in water treatment, such as LVMH and Tiffany for 14.7 billion euros in the luxury sector, or such as Altis on the Canadian Cogeco for 7.8 billion euros in the telecom sector. Here we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stéphane, for this great